Before we dive into this story, let me say that life doesn't always go the way you expect. Sometimes people come into your life and don't fit into neat little boxes of societal norm. Emotions you never knew existed surface, leaving you struggling to understand what's right. That's exactly what happened to me. When I look back now, I am not proud of it, but it shaped the person I am today. I wasn't prepared for how one decision could lead to a cascade of secrets, confusion, and guilt. To make matters even more complicated, it all started with someone I could never admit to having feelings for my stepbrother, Ethan. Let me explain. I grew up in a family that wasn't particularly close. We were polite, yes, but not deeply connected. Ethan was 5 years younger than me, and for most of our lives, we lived in completely different worlds. I was focused on high school while he was still watching cartoons. I left for college while he navigated through his awkward teenage years. But when I came back home after graduation, something shifted. Ethan wasn't the shy, awkward kid I remembered. He'd grown up smart, kind, and surprisingly charismatic. At first, I thought I was imagining it. How could I be drawn to someone I'd practically watched grow up? But the feeling was there, undeniable and unshakable. One evening, we sat in the backyard under the stars, reminiscing about childhood memories. It started innocently in teasing each other about silly things we used to do. Then, Ethan said something that stopped me cold. "You know, I've always looked up to you," he said softly. "But lately, I feel like I see you differently." My heart raced in a way it shouldn't have. I laughed nervously and tried to change the subject, but his words lingered in the air. That was the beginning. Ethan's comment seemed innocent, but it opened a door I couldn't close. In the weeks that followed, I noticed emotions I had no business feeling. I tried convincing myself that Ethan's words meant nothing, that he was just being sentimental. But the truth was, I couldn't ignore the way he looked at me, like I was someone more than his stepsister. Ethan always found ways to be near me. He'd stop by my room to chat, linger in the kitchen while I cooked, and sit just a little too close when we watched television together. At first, I dismissed it as harmless. Families are supposed to be close, right? But this wasn't just closeness. It was tensiona silent, unspoken pull I was too scared to acknowledge, but too weak to avoid. Then, one rainy Sunday afternoon, everything changed. We were stuck inside, bored and restless. Ethan suggested we play cards like we used to as kids. "You've got no chance," I teased, trying to keep the mood light. "We'll see about that," he shot back with a grin. As we played, the atmosphere shifted. Every touch of his hand when passing the cards felt intentional. Every glance lingered a little too long. At one point, I reached across the table to grab the deck, and our hands brushed. It was such a small moment, but it felt electric. We froze, our eyes locking. "You feel it too, don't you?" Ethan asked quietly. I didn't know how to respond. Denying it felt like a lie, but admitting it would change everything. "I don't know what you are talking about," I whispered, pulling my hand back and standing up quickly. Ethan wasn't letting it go. He followed me into the living room, his expression serious. "Don't do that," he said. "Don't pretend this isn't happening." "It's wrong," I blurted out. We can't feel this way." "Why not?" he challenged. "I know what we're supposed to be, but I can't help how I feel, and I don't think you can either." I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that I felt like I was being pulled in two directions, and no matter which way I went, someone would get hurt. I told Ethan we couldn't talk about it anymore, but the damage was already done. The lines had blurred, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't unfeel what I felt. A few days later, something unexpected happened. I came across a photograph tucked into the back of a family album. It showed Ethan and me as kids, but in the corner of the picture was someone I didn't recognize, a woman. She was holding a small baby and smiling at the camera. Curious, I asked my mom about the photo. Her face paled, and she hesitated before answering. "That's Claire," she said, "your biological father's cousin. Let's just say she was close to your dad's side of the family." Something about the way she said it made my stomach churn. Was there more to Ethan and me than I knew? This revelation left me with more questions than answers, but I knew one thing: the complicated feelings between Ethan and me were far from over. After discovering the mysterious photo, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling it gave me. Was there a deeper connection between Ethan and me that no one had mentioned? I didn't bring it up again, afraid of the answers I might get. Instead, I threw myself into distractions work, friends, anything to avoid thinking about Ethan or the questions swirling in my mind. But Ethan was always there. He found excuses to spend time together, helping me with errands, lingering in the kitchen, or sitting close during movie nights. And I let him. Despite everything, I wanted him near. One evening, while we watched a romantic drama we weren't paying attention to, I rested my head on his shoulder. It was a small, innocent gesture, but it felt like crossing a line. "You are making this really hard," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What am I making hard?" I asked, playing dumb, even though I knew exactly what he meant. "This," he said, gesturing between us. "Us." "There is no us, Ethan," I said, pulling away. "There can't be." "Then why does it feel like there is?" I didn't have an answer. Instead, I stood up, mumbling something about being tired, and went to my room. I thought that would be the end of it for the night, but I was wrong. Later, there was a knock on my door. "Ethan, I am not in the mood," I said. "It's important," he replied, his tone firm. I hesitated, then opened the door. He stepped inside and closed it behind him. For a moment, we stood there, the silence heavy and uncomfortable. "I don't care what anyone else thinks," he said, looking directly at me. "I care about what you think about what you feel." "I can't do this," I said, my voice breaking. "It's not just about us. There are consequences as a family, our lives. It's not fair." "Fair doesn't matter," he said, stepping closer. "I am not asking you to do anything right now. I just need you to be honest. Do you feel it too?" His question hung in the air, demanding an answer I wasn't ready to give. Admitting the truth would change everything. But how long could I keep lying to him and to myself? "I don't know what I feel," I said finally, my voice barely audible. "But whatever this is, it can't happen. It's not right." Ethan didn't argue. He nodded slowly, his expression a mix of heartbreak and understanding. "I am not going to push you," he said softly. "But I am here, and I think you know how I feel." With that, he left, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The next few days were a blur. I avoided Ethan, throwing myself into anything that kept me busy, but no matter what I did, I couldn't stop thinking about him. One evening, I found a small notebook on the coffee table. At first, I thought it was mine, but when I opened it, I realized it belonged to Ethan. It was filled with sketches, notes, and bits of poetry, things I never knew he did. Near the back was a page that stopped me cold. It wasn't labeled, but as I read, my heart sank. It was about me. He had written about how he saw Menard just as his stepsister. but as someone he admired, someone he couldn't stop thinking about. It was raw and honest, and it scared me. I knew I shouldn't have read it, but I couldn't stop. Every word pulled me deeper into a place I wasn't sure I could escape from. It wasn't just feelings anymore, it was real, written in ink, impossible to ignore. That night, I couldn't sleep. I spent hours staring at the journal, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to confront Ethan, to demand an explanation, but another part of me knew exactly what he'd say. The next morning, I avoided him entirely. I couldn't face him after what I'd read, but Ethan wasn't someone you could avoid for long. By evening, he found me sitting in the backyard, staring blankly at the horizon. "You've been quiet all day," he said, taking a seat next to me. "I've just been thinking," I replied, trying to sound casual. "About what?" he asked, his tone cautious. I hesitated, my fingers nervously picking at the edge of my sweater. "I found your journal," I admitted, not looking at him. For a moment, there was silence. Then I heard him exhale sharply. "I didn't mean for you to see that," he said quietly. "I know," I replied, "but I did, and now I don't know what to do." "Do about what?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "About us," I said, finally turning to look at him. His expression was a mix of fear and hope, and it broke my heart. "I don't want to make things harder for you," he said, "but I can't pretend I don't feel what I feel. I've tried, and it's impossible." "I don't know if I can do this, Ethan," I said, my voice breaking. "It's too much. It's too complicated." "It doesn't have to be," he said, reaching for my hand. "We don't have to figure everything out right now. I just need to know if you feel the same way." I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell him this was all a mistake, but I couldn't lie anymore. "Yes," I whispered, barely able to get the word out. The weight of our secret grew heavier with each passing day. But just as I began to grapple with my feelings, something unexpected happened. One evening, Ethan and I were talking quietly on the back porch. Our conversation was interrupted when our older cousin Natalie walked out unexpectedly. We froze, startled. "What's going on here?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. "Nothing," I said quickly, too quickly. Natalie wasn't stupid. She looked at both of us, her gaze sharp and probing. "You two have been acting weird for weeks," she said. "Don't tell me it's nothing." I forced a laugh. "We've just been spending more time together, that's all." "Yeah, and that's what's weird," she replied. "You two were never this close before. What changed?" Panic rose in my chest. Natalie was the last person I wanted to suspect anything. "Nothing changed," I said, trying to sound casual. "We're just getting along better these days." Natalie didn't look convinced, but she dropped the subject for the moment. Later that night, Ethan and I sat in my room, the tension between us palpable. "She knows something's up," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We'll handle it," Ethan replied. "How?" I asked, my voice breaking. "This is already hard enough, without someone sniffing around. What if she figures it out? What if she tells someone?" "We'll figure it out," he said firmly. "But I am not walking away just because things are getting difficult." His determination was comforting, but it didn't erase the fear gnawing at me. Natalie wasn't someone who let things go, and I knew it was only a matter of time before she started asking questions again. The walls were closing in, and I could feel the weight of our secret pressing down harder than ever. The days following Natalie's probing questions were a blur of tension and anxiety. Ethan and I tried to act normal, but it was impossible to ignore the growing suspicion in her eyes. She was always watching, always listening, as if she were piecing together a puzzle we didn't want her to solve. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Natalie dropped a bombshell. "So," she began, her tone casual but her eyes fixed on me, "I was talking to Aunt Claire the other day, and she mentioned something interesting." My heart sank. Aunt Claire had a way of knowing things she shouldn't. She said Ethan and I weren't always part of this family. Natalie continued, her gaze sharp. "Apparently there's a lot about our past that no one talks about." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to her, then to Ethan and me. "What are you getting at, Natalie?" Ethan asked, his voice calm, but his posture tense. "I am just saying," she replied, leaning back in her chair. "It's funny how secrets have a way of coming out, don't you think?" Ethan's jaw tightened. I could feel the weight of her words pressing down on us. "I think you should stop fishing for drama," Ethan said firmly. Natalie smirked. "Maybe. Or maybe I am just trying to understand why you two have been acting so close lately." After dinner, Ethan and I retreated to the backyard, desperate for air and privacy. "She knows," I whispered, my voice shaking. "She doesn't know anything," Ethan replied, though his tone was less certain. "She's not going to let this go," I said. "We have to figure out what to do before she digs any deeper." Ethan nodded, his eyes scanning the darkened yard as if searching for answers in the shadows. Later that night, I decided to confront the truth head-on. I found an old box of family photos and documents, in the attic things I'd never bothered to look through before. Among the papers, I found something that stopped me cold, a hospital birth record for Ethan. But it wasn't what I expected. The name listed under mother wasn't Ethan's mother, the woman who had raised him. It was someone else entirely, a name I didn't recognize. My hands trembled as I read and reread the document, trying to make sense of it. "What are you doing up here?" Ethan's voice startled me. He stood in the doorway, his expression wary. "I found this," I said, holding up the record. "Ethan, who is this woman?" His face went pale. "I was going to tell you," he said quietly, "but I didn't know how." "Tell me what?" I demanded, my voice rising. "She's my biological mother," he admitted. "My dad had an affair before he met your mom. When my birth mother passed away, he took me in, and they raised me as their own." The room spun. This changed everything, and yet it didn't change enough. "So, we're not related?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Not by blood," Ethan confirmed. The revelation hit me like a tidal wave. The barrier that had always stood between us, the one I thought made us impossible, was gone. But the weight of our family's expectations and the consequences of our actions remain. The next day, Natalie cornered me in the hallway. "Care to explain what's going on?" she asked, her arms crossed. "There's nothing to explain," I said, trying to brush past her. "Don't play dumb," she snapped. "I know you and Ethan are hiding something." I stopped, turning to face her. "And what if we are? What's it to you?" Her eyes widened, surprised by my defiance. "So it's true," she said, her voice lowering. "What's true?" "That you two are involved," she said, her voice dripping with judgment. "You don't know anything," I said firmly. "I know enough," she replied, "and so will everyone else if you don't end this." Her threat hung in the air, but I didn't back down. "You don't get to decide what's right for us," I said. "We're not hurting anyone." Natalie laughed bitterly. "You think this won't hurt anyone? You are delusional." I walked away, before she could say anything else, my heart pounding. That night, Ethan and I made a decision. We couldn't keep living in fear, hiding from everyone and everything. If we do this, I said, we do it together. No more secrets. Together, he agreed, taking my hand. We knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be judgment, anger, and pain. But for the first time, we were ready to face it because what we had was worth fighting for. Months later, the dust had settled. The initial shock of our relationship had passed, and while not everyone accepted it, most of our family had come around. Natalie eventually apologized, admitting that she had acted out of fear for how our choices would affect the family. Ethan and I moved forward, stronger than ever. Our love had been forged in secrecy and struggle, but it had survived, and that was all that mattered. Sometimes, the most complicated paths lead to the most beautiful destinations.